special event sponsored by the Office of Sustainability, the Environmental Studies minor, the Geology Department, and the MES Department, the Masters of Environmental Studies program, and the Political Science Department. So welcome those sponsors and thank them for their contributions and helping us to bring this wonderful event together. Today we have a very, very special opportunity to hear experts in the field on the strategic imperatives and national security implications of climate change. And we are really honored here at the College of Charleston to have some very distinguished guests. First, I'm going to introduce Andrew Holland. He is the Director of Studies and Senior Fellow for Energy and Climate. As he just told me, he does all things energy and climate related for the ASP. And I'm going to allow him then to introduce our two distinguished friends. Please join me in welcoming this panel, but particularly Andrew.
And thank you all for being here, and thanks to any who are watching this live or recorded down the road. So let me see, is this connected? Yeah, we're connected, we're live, we're going. The American Security Project is a nonpartisan national security think tank based up in Washington. Started about a decade ago to look at issues of America's long-term national security. That's everything from war and peace in the Middle East to nuclear nonproliferation to energy security, American competitiveness, and into things like climate change and environmental security. So this is security in a big picture, the elements of national security. And before we're here as part of this is a national tour, and this is actually the last one slated on the tour. But over the last 2 years, we've been all over the country talking about the impacts of climate change on national security. And we've been to places as varied as Pittsburgh, Florida, Texas, Colorado, Arizona, Tennessee, Chicago, San Francisco. So varied politically, varied environmentally, and varied in terms of the national security perspective as well. So we're pleased to be here in Charleston, pleased to be here at the College of Charleston. My role today is to just briefly introduce our two distinguished national security leaders, tell you a little bit about ASP, and then I'm going to run through very quickly the basic facts on climate change, the things that you need to know, the things that we need to know about what's happening right now on climate change and what's predicted to happen. And again, like I said, these are the facts. These are not in dispute. Why don't I start, though, and introduce our two national security professionals here. First, on my far left, Lieutenant General Norm Seip. He's a retired 3-star Lieutenant General of the Air Force, a genuine bona fide fighter pilot. He flew F-15s over Iraq. His last tour was Commander 12th Air Force at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. He has 35 years of experience in the Air Force, and we are lucky to have him affiliated with ASP. To my immediate left here is Brigadier General Steve Cheney, U.S. Marine Corps retired. He has 30 years of experience in the Marine Corps, first as an artilleryman and then in recruit training. His last tour was actually locally here at Parris Island. He was Commanding General of Parris Island. And I'm sure he can tell you some stories about what goes on down there and what goes on here. Good stories, that's right. Let me tell you a little bit. This is, as you can see, this is our board at the American Security Project. You may recognize some of those names and faces. John Kerry, Chuck Hagel, Gary Hart, and Warren Rudman. 4 senators from both parties came together to form us to think about these things from the nonpartisan perspective. I'd encourage you to go to our website and learn more. So let me talk about the science of climate change. And what I'm going to tell you here is straight down the lines the facts. And you can see these either here, or it looks like if you can't see it behind me, you can see it on the slides up here above you. So first, let's start with the facts. The first is the Earth is warming, and the temperature record on that is indisputable. As you can see, this is the 20th century. Can't see that. In the 20th century, air temperatures increased by 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can see on that graph, most of that has been since the 1970s. The warmest decade on record was the 2000s, with each of the previous 3 decades warmer than the decade before, so consecutively getting warmer, and we're halfway through the 2010s now, and they are well on their way to being progressively warmer than the 2000s. So then the question is, hasn't the climate always changed? And you can see here along this graph, CO2 concentration, temperature, and sea level charted out over the last 450,000 years. And you can see throughout that time, yes, of course, there has been a lot of variability. And throughout that whole time, humanity in some form has been walking the Earth throughout all those time periods. But what's important to note is that over the last 10,000 years, we really haven't seen that variability. We've seen this remarkable period of climate stability. And I think it's important to note what happened in those 10,000 years. Well, agriculture, human settlement, the arts, literature, states, empires, and everything in human history. And most importantly, the population of humans went from about 5 million hunter-gatherers to the 7 billion we have today. I think actually that over that time period, that stability allowed us to use our big brains to think about things other than just day-to-day, year-to-year survival, and think about more and bigger things. But importantly for today's discussion, that stability is ending, and you can see this is the last 2,000 years, and you can see over that last time period a spike upwards in temperature. We should have been seeing, you can kind of see, it would have been a kind of a slow decline towards the next ice age. Now we had about 20,000 years or so until the next ice age, but we were in a slow decline down to that. And instead we've gone in this spike upwards, and it's unprecedented in human history, and it's changing that stability. And the reason for that change is fairly simple. It's what's called the greenhouse effect. Greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide is the most prevalent one, but there are others, carbon, methane, a whole range of chlorofluorocarbons and others. These greenhouse gases essentially act like a blanket on the Earth, keeping the planet warm and livable. And just like a blanket, if you add another layer, it makes you a little bit warmer. Science linking carbon emissions to the increase in temperatures is definitive, and you can see along this graph, this is CO2 in the atmosphere versus that temperature graph that I showed you before. So pretty clear correlation, and the correlation is direct. And the science is established and generally agreed upon. Now I like this study. For the last 21 years, from 1991 till 2012, 97% of the climate research papers agree that global warming is happening and humans are the cause. And you can even drag this further on. In 2013 then, there were something, I don't have the exact number, about 2,000 papers on climate science published, and one of them disagreed with the facts, these facts. So these are the facts, and the arguments you've heard against them are political, not scientific. There are alternative explanations out there. Solar magnification, water vapor, various others, and they have been thoroughly debunked in the scientific literature. So the arguments against them are political, not scientific. The presence of snow in January doesn't disprove decades of unprecedented warming in our Earth's climate system. And like I said, 97% of our climate scientists agree with those. But we're not here to talk about this, and that's why I've kind of rushed through it, and we're happy to talk through it afterwards with you. What we instead want to talk about is what that means for our national security professionals, for our military, and for all of us living here. What does that mean for security? And so to talk more about that, I'm going to turn it over to General Steve Cheney.
You want to do the Zappan for me?
I can, yeah.
Sure. That works. Can you hear me in the back? You know, I think it was Winston Churchill who said, since the speed of light travels faster than the speed of sound, some people appear bright until you hear them speak. I hope I don't disprove that. That's a joke now. Come on. Loosen up a little bit. Next slide. I'm going to talk about the military aspects of climate change. I'm not going to argue with science, and I think Andrew has laid that out pretty specifically. We can get into that if you'd like. But I'm going to lay out a whole number of reasons why your Department of Defense in the United States should be concerned about climate change from a national security perspective. And we are deeply concerned about it. And the Department of Defense is planning to do things because of it. You can see here a copy of what we call the QDR, Quadrennial Defense Review, put out every 4 years, obviously. Last one was in 2014. You can pull it up online. There are several pages within the QDR that specifically talk about climate change and what the Department of Defense intends to do in response to it. Next slide. You can see here listed on the right side a number of things that are occurring as a consequence of climate change, not the least of which humanitarian disaster and relief, and I'm going to point out some examples of this here a little later in the brief. Our installations worldwide, particularly those coastal and Navy, are susceptible to sea level rise. Droughts and wildfires, which are causing all kinds of instability that you might not have been familiar with. Supply chains and our dependence on fossil fuels is a real vulnerability for the Department of Defense. And of course, we've got to make sure that we can defend ourselves in extreme weather conditions. Next slide. You might think, some would say that maybe we're in this by ourselves. It's only the United States military that's really concerned about this. And I can categorically tell you that's not the case. We did a study last year, and it was pretty simple. We went to every embassy in the country here and asked them if their country had written climate change as a security threat in their national security strategy or in one of their papers somewhere. And 70% of the countries in the world had written it into their national security strategy. What's curious about this is the 30% that didn't were either involved in some conflict or either didn't have a government or didn't have a military or were third world. The vast majority of the countries understood that climate change is a threat, and those, by the way, that included Russia, China, obviously all of Europe. And so we know we're not in this boat alone, that the other military establishments are just as much concerned about it as we are. Next slide. I'm going to start going through some examples here. We try to picture climate change as an accelerant of instability, or what we call a threat multiplier. In and of itself, it might not be the cause of the instability, but it's certainly going to contribute to that, and I'll give several examples. I believe the picture you see up here on the left is in Mali with the Tuaregs. For those who may or may not be familiar with the insurrection that occurred there a couple years ago, the Tuaregs are a nomadic tribe. They lost all their crops due to severe drought. They moved around and went to the northern end of the country. They were not welcome there, hence started the insurrection in Mali, to which the French primarily responded, although the United States provided the vast majority of the logistic help to the French. And I point that out. A lot of people would say, well, it was the drought. Well, the drought was ostensibly caused by climate change. It's the worst in their history, and that's what pushed them specifically up to the north. Let's go to the next slide. There's no doubt you here in Charleston understand catastrophic weather, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit too, but you know, there's catastrophic weather all over the world, and it's local and it's international as well. Next slide. My poster child for this is Bangladesh. I've got a very good friend, a retired Army Major General in Bangladesh, who's a member of a group called the Global Military Advisory Council on Climate Change. It's 2 flag officers from each country around the world. And his problem is particularly acute. if they have a 1.5 foot level in sea rise, they're going to have a minimum of 5.5 million refugees or immigrants, if you will. He will tell you, and he's told me a number of times, that figure is probably more on order of 20 million. The fact of the matter is, they're not going to stop that sea level rise anytime soon, so they know that it's coming. They will have a minimum of that 5 million, probably 20 million. The biggest problem they're faced with is, what do you do with them? For those not familiar with the border between Bangladesh and India, it's armed much as was Berlin during the Cold War. You don't just cross into the border and go into India. They're not going there. They're not going to Myanmar either, or Burma. So here, with all the immigration and refugee problems we've got in the Middle East, which right now, depending what figure you use, could be 2 or 3 million coming out of Syria, you're going to lop on 5, 6, 10, 20 million in Southeast Asia, and you are really, really going to have a humanitarian crisis occurring in Southeast Asia. Next slide. On the left is Typhoon Haiyan. Now, I think we got another picture later on. We'll talk Superstorm Sandy. But Haiyan, at the time, had the highest recorded wind of any typhoon or hurricane. And it occurred in the Philippines. You're probably familiar. Hit the Philippines midway through the country, 7,000 dead, a 46-foot tidal surge. I know you're familiar with the severe tides here, but nothing quite like that. And the kicker to this one was, the only country that could readily respond to that humanitarian crisis was us. We sent in 12,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines from the Pacific Command. They did an amazing humanitarian effort here. And I point that out is because around the world, we are pretty much the only ones that have the logistics that are able to respond to a crisis of this magnitude. And I'm not directly saying that Haiyan was caused by climate change, but it certainly was exacerbated by climate change. The guy you see in the lower right there is Admiral Sam Locklear. He was the combatant commander for Pacific Command. When asked if he could list all the threats that he had in the Pacific, which is the worst or the one he's most concerned about, and he said long term, it's climate change. It's not China, it's not North Korea, it was climate change. And he said because that's going to exacerbate everything that he does there, it's going to cause conflict and it's really going to cause a problem. So you can see that they're working on this. I've got a lot of other hot spots I want to talk about, but I'm going to turn them over to a real expert here, and that's Lieutenant General Norm Seip of the Air Force. Norm, I'll give the podium to you. Thanks.
Be the expert. You know, as my Marine friend, he can hold a mic and talk at the same time. A fighter pilot's got to keep both his hands free, so anytime he can shoot down his watch and tell you how great he is. Of course, you heard the story about the little boy that looked at his dad and said, "Hey, Dad, when I grow up, I want to be a fighter pilot." And his son looked at him, or his dad looked at him and said, "Son, you got to choose one. You can't be both." So if I could, first of all, thanks for the invitation to be here. And thanks for your interest in climate change and the threats to our national security. And I realize there's lots you can be doing on a Monday afternoon, but the fact that you're here, the fact that we're taping this, and the fact that we're sponsored by so many different departments here tells me that the College of Charleston is interested in what's going on around the world and how it may impact them or their kids in the future there. So if I could, let's move to the Middle East. And I think what you'll see there are pictures of a U.S. fuel convoy burning in Iraq, a fuel convoy over the Khyber Pass, and a U.S. Marine patrol before the Haditha Dam. So we know, and I know personally from the military's long decade of operations in the Middle East, that any military activity in this region must take water and energy into account. Our supply lines in Iraq are the most vulnerable area to attack, and guess what? Our enemies figured out very quickly that that was our Achilles heel. From 2004 to 2007, which many people say was the height of the Iraq War, there were over 2,300 casualties that were on these resupply convoys. 70% of these convoys were just strictly for fuel and water. And I will tell you, as the deputy commander for all of air operations in Iraq and Afghanistan for the 2004 to 2005 time frame, I personally sent air crews up in the air to provide top cover for these convoys. I flew some of the missions myself, and I saw up close and personal what the havoc the enemy rained on our soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen that were on these convoys. And when I got back from Iraq, and I commanded the combat air forces west of Mississippi, I was still sending airmen over to Iraq and Afghanistan to be part of the Marines and the soldiers and the sailors that were on these convoys. And I tell you that some of my commanders had the very sobering experience of having to write moms and dads and husbands and wives about their sons and daughters and their spouses that lost their lives on these very vulnerable convoys there. And this is not going to change because of climate change. Scientists tell us that there will be less water in the Middle East, and future operations will require the movement of even more water and fuel to the front lines, and will be done by convoys. So let's think about how this will affect the societies of the region. Let me just go to the next slide, and I think what you'll see there is pictures of the 2014 American airstrikes on ISIL around the Mosul Dam and Iraq's major dams. So the Middle East is already parched. Okay, that goes without saying. That's my Captain Obvious name tag on it. And climate change is expected to make that worse and less predictable. Droughts are going to be longer and more intense. And to exacerbate climate problems, now add the problems of poor governance. We know that the ongoing conflicts in these countries has pushed water management down on the priority level. I mean, when you're fighting a conflict, guess what? Worrying about water and stuff kind of goes down on that priority list there. And governments across the region, especially in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, and Iran, have failed to invest in needed water projects. And that government failure is going to compound the threats of climate change. So with the expanding war against ISIL and other violent extremist organizations, we're seeing how water is being used as a weapon of war, particularly by the ISIL militants, by targeting the dams along the Tigris and Euphrates River. Now, American airstrikes around both of the dams, Haifa and Mosul, certainly have chased the enemy away, but they control the Fallujah Dam. In their actions have forced over 40,000 people downstream to move because literally they've opened the floodgates and they've inundated their homes, their farms, and their crops. As the slide says, if you control water in the Middle East, you can control the government. The Syrian civil war, as General Cheney referred to, is the most extreme example of how drought combined with poor governance can drive unrest. And certainly the pictures show the extreme and accelerated unrest that goes on there in the area of Aleppo. The 5 years preceding the beginning of this unrest, from about 2006 to 2010, saw a drought unparalleled in both length and severity in recent Syrian history. And for decades, the Assad regime had ignored water conservation issues and agriculture in general. So what's the result? The drought and the government failure led to a mass migration of about 1.5 million people from the rural areas to urban centers like Aleppo, Homs, and Daraa. They had no jobs or little food. Now these regions are central in the ongoing civil war there. Now, is Syria at war because of climate change? No. It's at war because Assad decided to kill the peaceful protesters. But the drought was an overlooked driver and accelerant of the Syrian conflict. The severity of the drought was increased by the inability of the Assad regime to prepare for or adapt to the extreme conditions. And an example of the threat multiplier that General Cheney just referenced here earlier. So from there, let's move down to sub-Saharan Africa, in which you'll see there are images of Boko Haram pledging allegiance to ISIS and the disappearing Lake Chad. Extreme droughts and food scarcity from climate change already are putting pressure on fragile states and regions in Africa, as well as their respective governments. Africa is very much at risk from droughts and extreme weather, which can undermine not only personal security of families, tribes, as well as the entire region. And decreased agricultural production and water shortages caused by climate change may lead to increased tension and migration. Migration can exacerbate ethnic or religious tensions by forcing groups to compete for scarce resources. And a good example on the slide there is Boko Haram in Nigeria. The U.S. Institute for Peace has linked desertification and disappearance of Lake Chad in northern Nigeria, as well as across the border of Chad, with the rise of Boko Haram over the last 5 years. So it's tempting to see these challenges presented by climate change as something that affects the rest of the world. Not my problem. But all of us in this room know that problems around the world don't stay in place. They move around. They look for voids. And the U.S. certainly has an interest in a stable, predictable world, not one with increased stress societies and failing ecosystems. But I would submit that that's exactly what we're facing each and every day, and that being an unpredictable world out there that does have stress societies and that does have failing ecosystems out there. So the weak states have the tendency to become failed states. Societies may be unable to cope with sudden shocks, such as hurricanes or drought, and long-term stresses that come from decreased agricultural yield brought on by climate change. So the strong states may grab resources from weaker states, and while no one expects the vast majorities of these weak states to fail, I will tell you the strong states will take advantage of the weaker governments to secure increasingly scarce resources. And two good examples of that is China's resource policy in Africa, and certainly the politics of water in the Middle East. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to General Cheney, who's going to kind of bring us a little bit more home into our own borders, and certainly right down here to the state of South Carolina.
Thanks, General. I'll quickly mention one of our overseas bases. Diego Garcia is a logistics base we have in the Indian Ocean, owned by the Brits, but we put a Marine brigade's worth of equipment on that island to be responsive to what's going on in Southeast Asia. We know for a fact it's going underwater. We'll lose that base probably next 20 to 30 years, so that brigade's worth of equipment has to go somewhere. You can see on this slide, you can see the coast on the left, and then I think that's Sandy on the right. Some would not equate Sandy to a joint military operation, but Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Guard, Army Guard all responded to that particular contingency. And I might point out, unfunded contingency. Somewhere along the line, somebody's paying the bill for all these servicemen and women to do their job and provide the supplies, and so it's coming out of the DoD budget one way or the other. Of course, familiar with DoD budget and sequestration, they're really being crunched as it is. Next slide. Plane on the left, Homestead Air Force Base in Florida after Hurricane Andrew, if I remember right, decimated the base. I mean, just decimated the base. Category 5. We ended up closing that base. Those occurrences are going to be far more frequent in Florida. Eglin Air Force Base, which is up in the Panhandle, closed twice last year due to severe floods, first time in its history. All our coastal installations are threatened primarily by sea level rise, but also by hurricanes as well. Norfolk Naval Station, they're having to raise all their piers 3 feet just to have the piers be serviceable for the ships that come in there. The air station in Norfolk will probably go underwater next 30 or 40 years. That whole Hampton Roads area in Norfolk really has a severe problem on their hands. Next slide. I think the shot on the left there is of New Orleans. We went down and toured there a while back. Here's a staggering statistic for you. The land south of New Orleans, we lose a football field's worth of land every 45 minutes. Every 45 minutes. About a decade ago, that was every 72 hours, give or take. And that's primarily through erosion because they've cut the canals for the oil wells, but it's also because of sea level rise. And they have a big problem now. The city of New Orleans itself is actually in pretty good shape. We went there and toured it, of course, after Katrina. They learned that the hard way. And they're into the adaptation phase big time, and they've really shored up all the levees. And I think they've kind of understood it. But south of there, we're going to lose most of that particular land. Our agriculture is definitely threatened primarily by drought, and it makes me think of another dry area that we perhaps hadn't pulled the string on, so I'm going to go back over to the Middle East, and that's the Arab Spring. The wildfires that occurred in Russia in 2010 decimated the wheat crop. As a consequence, wheat prices skyrocketed. It's the main staple they have to make bread in the Middle East, and that was a big contributor to the economic instability that existed in 2010, 2011, and contributed to Arab Spring. Just another string that people would not normally pull. Next slide. And I'll bring this home even more. I think that's another shot of Sandy on the left.
That's Joaquin.
I'm sorry?
That's Joaquin a month ago.
Oh, geez. The one down in...
Yeah, the one that just brought the rain bomb here.
Oh, the rain bomb here in Charleston. Well, I'm no stranger to hurricanes or problems here in the Low Country. I was the commanding general, as was pointed out, from 99 to 2001. And when I took over the job in 99, here I am, a bright, shiny new Brigadier General, and excited about going to Parris Island, which I was. And if you've never been, you ought to go. Just go on a Friday to see a graduation open to the public. Here's my pitch. But when I got there, the turnover with my predecessor, he says, you're really going to have only one major big problem while you're down here. And I'm thinking, oh, it's maltreatment by the drill instructors, or they're going to do something stupid. And he goes, it's hurricanes. And I kind of jokingly, yeah, sure, it's going to be a hurricane. That was June of 99. Well, in September, or late August, if I recall right, Hurricane Floyd took dead shot aim at Parris Island, Category 5. Storm surge projected to be 21, 22 feet. Parris Island mean sea level about 12 feet above mean sea level. So I had a big decision on my hands. 8,000 recruits on deck, another couple thousand permanent personnel on an island in South Carolina. And of course, they started all the emergency action teams, and we met with the governor, everybody. I was trying to get him to declare a state of emergency so we could evacuate. He was constipated, so we didn't get a decision. And I said, we're evacuating. And so we took 400 buses worth of recruits and threw them onto 95 and Route 16, headed to Albany, Georgia. Many of you probably don't remember, but I think it was probably the world's biggest traffic jam. It was horrendous. It was horrendous, and they learned a lot from it, but we had to get everybody off that base or we were all going underwater. Luck was with me that day. It missed us. It went straight up into North Carolina. It also cut, by the way, Route 95 in half for about 3 weeks. You couldn't drive down Route 95. Of course, this is no stranger to you all and what you suffered here in the last couple of weeks with the rain, but this has all been exacerbated by climate change, and it's affecting bases and stations, and it certainly is affecting everybody here in South Carolina. Next one. So, Andrew pointed out the science early. I'm not going to get into a pissing contest about the science, but the sea levels are going up. That's a fact. I mean, it's just going to happen. The kicker is, we know how to stop it, but you're not going to stop it today, tomorrow, next year, maybe not even the next decade, and that's stop CO2 pollution in the atmosphere. And we can get into, we'll talk about that specifically if you want, but we're an all the above organization at the American Security Project, whether it's cap and trade, carbon tax, more efficiency. You just got to stop burning fossil fuels and figure out alternatives to stop poisoning the atmosphere, because that's what's causing this place to heat up, I can tell you right now. I think that's a shot of your hometown there. All right, go ahead, next slide. This is my namesake. I am not related. I am not related. But dear Dick, he did say that if there was a 1% chance that the nuclear technology that the Pakistanis had, they were going to give to a terrorist organization, we would go and do something about it. 1% chance, because of the catastrophic consequences that would happen. So if you think there's more than a 1% chance that climate change is going to exacerbate all the conflict and problems that we have today, then perhaps we ought to be doing something about it. And I will tell you, in the military establishment, what happens is they're very good at planning. Every combatant commander, the Pentagon, will have what's called a J5 plan section. There's normally a group of young majors and lieutenant colonels down there slaving away, planning for every eventuality. But they're talking about climate change and what it's causing the defense establishment, and where our defense establishment has to be prepared to respond to the problems that are exacerbated by climate change, and they're doing that every day. I think the problem is, of course, not everybody else quite gets that. And that's the message that we're here to deliver. We've been going around the country talking about it, and I'm very excited to have you all down here. The best audiences we ever have are at colleges and universities. I think you're perhaps more attentive. Everybody else, I put them to sleep. But I'm glad you're here and glad you're interested in this topic, and appreciate your interest in it. And with that, I am going to close it up and ask if there's any questions. Thank you very much. Yeah, questions?
I'll moderate it.
Yeah, let me see if I can get this.
I got one word. Yeah, we'll bring it over here. And then I can hand it off between them, or I'll dive on it myself. So let's. I think I saw one right here, sir.
Oh, thank you. What is being done to bring this message to the United States Congress in a way that it kind of people begin to get it?
General Cheney, you were up on the Hill 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, clearly this is a plank issue from our organization, and we're located in D.C. for a reason, so we can influence the influencers, and we can go up on a lot of time, spend a lot of time on the Hill. And I was on a panel 2 weeks ago at the invite of the ambassador of the Netherlands, and this is a side story. It might get a little long-winded, but it bears the question. The Netherlands has a problem with climate change. They're already underwater, and they know it, and they know how to adapt, and they've done that in an excellent fashion. But the general opinion in the Netherlands, and I would say probably predominantly in Europe, is most of the United States doesn't care. If it's not in my backyard, it's not my problem. I don't have to do a damn thing about it. And so he held a panel up on the Hill in the House side 2 weeks ago, and he had a congressman sitting next to me named Chris Gibson from New York, mid-state New York. Republican, conservative, just a distinguished Army veteran, by the way, a wonderful, wonderful guy. And of course, the fear on that side of the house is that if you talk climate change, you get painted left-wing liberal and you're done. Just ask Bob Inglis from South Carolina, who did exactly that here, a Republican, and was voted out of office in his primary, I might add. But the point is now that this has all started to shift, certainly since Inglis's day, and now what we've tried to do, pitching the national security side, is to give those on the right a little bit of cover to say, yeah, maybe there's something to this. I don't profess to be a Greenpeace or Sierra Club or a left-wing tree hugger, and you know, there are some things about, I don't like burning fossil fuels. We prefer alternative energies. We're going to be burning fossil fuels for quite a while, by the way, because we don't have an alternative. But we've been banging this drum hard. Of course, this current administration has really been banging it hard. And Obama's got a big climate change policy. It's like all his policies, not received well on the Hill. So kind of they're dismissive about it. But what I'm kind of hoping is perhaps we can get this seed planted on the national security side to get both sides to reconcile that climate change is the threat that it is, and to figure out ways that we can start mitigating this and fix it. So we're on the Hill. I'm on the Hill weekly pitching this. Do you all want to add anything to that?
I could just add one
Sure.
thing.
Norm?
One of the other messages we try to share in order to be able to cross both sides of the aisle and give a little protection to you know, a left or a right or a middle of the road there is that we try to state the fact that national security, energy security, the environment, the economy are all linked, and they're all tied together. And so we need to be smart as far as decisions we make in any one of those categories there to understand the second and third order effects or the unintended consequences that we make, say, on the economy vis-a-vis energy or national security and vice versa. So again, we try to give our politicians a little bit of wiggle room so that they can, you know, take a stand and then not be you know, rejected by their constituents back home or by the folks that maybe are supporting their, you know, their time in office. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but again, it's all about giving options to folks so that they can take a stand and provide some type of protection to them. And I mean that in a good way.
Sir, right here. And then I'm going to ask a student to ask a question.
Yeah. So a lot of innovations are driven by military procurement dollars, and I'm just wondering if there's anything in the pipeline that you can tell us about that might get us off of fossil fuels.
Why don't you start? I'll have some stuff to add too.
Yeah, I mean, there's some in the administration take a hit over this too. Secretary Mavis of the Department of the Navy, perhaps most prominent in that he declared that we're going to make all the ships run on biofuels. But he has done that, except obviously the nukes. And but all the fossil fuel burning ones, every one of them now has at one time or another run on a biofuel, as have, as I understand it, all our aircraft. So that's one step. The most poignant example that I'll use, and I talk to Marines about it all the time, is you've got a Marine Lance Corporal sitting on a forward operating base in the middle of Afghanistan, and he's got to have power. He needs power to communicate. He needs power to run a lot of his weapon systems. Without it, I won't say they're dead, but pretty close. But in order to power the generators, to power the equipment, the comm equipment, they got to either have a generator or batteries. Well, we've now developed solar arrays, and mostly man-portable, that they can set up, put up rechargeable batteries. They don't need any fuel. They can do it on their own, so they don't need any batteries other than rechargeable ones. So those are just two kind of ideas with it. Andrew, do you want to?
Each one of the services has some very challenging but reachable goals when it talks about renewable energy. And the game plan is not just to buy something for the sake of buying it. We are now driving the cost of advanced biofuels down to they're actually competitive. For the Air Force and for the other services that are going to put these in their weapon systems, they have to be dropped in. They have to be able to use existing infrastructure. And basically, when I take an airplane and slam it in an afterburner, I'm not interested in the engine coughing. It's going to go in a full afterburner, and we're going to go do the mission. So every type of aircraft in the Air Force's inventory has been certified for alternative advanced biofuels. So if, in fact, we ever make that case or make that move. Now, just as General Cheney said, We're 90% of our transportation is based on fossil fuel. So this is not going to change overnight. But the fact that we are moving to something that will be affordable, which will be effective, which will impact all of us there, where we can go to the gas pump and we can push a button on regular fuel, whether I want some type of biodiesel or whatever that might be, or plug in my electric car there, is an opportunity. Because energy security is all about choices. It's all about choices.
Yeah, and as people say, all gas prices are low, price of oil is low now, so doesn't this take away the imperative for biofuels or anything like that? But if you think, you just saw in the news last week, 2 weeks ago, the DoD just let out the new contract for the long-range bomber. That's a $70 billion, $80 billion contract over 50 years. We're still flying B-52s, which were originally built in the 1950s. So it's they have to be able to think long-term, look long-term, and that means thinking about not only what's coming over the horizon for the 2020s, but what's the geopolitical, the technological environment look like of the 2030s, 2040s, 2050s, and so that's thinking long term, and that's also hedging your risk and thinking about real next generation energy sources, whether it's everything from what replaces oil to fusion energy and stuff like that.
And one last add-on to this, the Army's got a big program called Net Zero with its bases and stations where they produce as much energy as they consume. Air Force, we went out to Nellis, is it Nellis we were at?
Yeah.
And Davis, I think Davis Monthan's the other one, have two of the largest solar arrays in the world. And they're fantastic. They're working. So there are a lot of initiatives within the department to try to at least get off of burning fuel, using fuel, and to go to alternative energies. And the last one I'll add to this is, my organization, Andrew handles the energy side of the house. There's a lot of research going on. Fusion research is one of them, looking for long-term, see if we can find another alternative to burning any kind of fossil fuels.
Back there, yeah.
How will entrepreneurship affect the coming changes of the environment?
It's a good question. How will entrepreneurship affect coming change in the environment? Now, I'll tell a little bit from the DoD side, but more broadly, I think it's important to think about that. I went to a conference a couple of years ago with the then Assistant Secretary of Defense for operational energy, and she was making a big initiative to get the DoD to buy from smaller businesses, to buy from entrepreneurs, because as we see, this is where a lot of the new ideas come from, a lot of the new initiatives come from, is from entrepreneurs. But it's very difficult for a small business to sell to the DoD. Very difficult for the government to get involved in these sorts of things. So they were making an initiative to first just introduce themselves to it and show that it's an option, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs just think of just think of 140 characters. There's a saying by one of the Silicon Valley guys that says, we were promised flying cars, but instead we got 140 characters. But I think actually we're seeing a lot of innovation going into the clean energy space, the next generation energy space. There's a lot of money being made in that area, and I think people are getting involved in it. Over there, yeah.
Afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Craig Penn. I'm a second lieutenant in South Carolina National Guard. And I have a question for both of you, or all three of you. What role do you think the company is? What role do you think there is for a company level officer, or even a field level officer, in this sort of changes, or is it all kind of top down directed?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what's your, in the Marine Corps we call it MOS, special?
I'm a 92 Alpha quartermaster. I'm a platoon leader for a fuel and water platoon.
Super. As I mentioned, the Lance Corporal and the solar array, and General Seip talked about the amount the number of soldiers, sailors, and Marines that have literally died guarding fuel convoys in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it's staggering. I mean, it's sad. I mean, I think you'd much rather be fighting on the front line than defending a fuel truck going across the desert. So I think at your level, your immediate concern is tactical and the well-being of your soldiers that are working for you, and trying to see what the next situation is over the hill. But I think on your side, you can be deep down thinking about what are other alternative energies or what are other ways that you could conserve energy or that others could conserve energy, and you could float that idea back up. The solar array thing it's not very complicated. I mean, we all understand it, but that did originate from a junior Marine saying this is stupid. And we do some things that aren't particularly bright on occasion. And we just throw money at the issue and just say, okay, we'll fix this when there's a better solution that would come from your level instead of somebody at our level who can't see the forest for the trees. So that's the advice I would give, Norm.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is any good senior leader worth his weight in salt is going to encourage innovation by his lower ranking troops, whether it be enlisted officer. And any good senior leader, if he's worth his weight or her weight in salt, is going to embrace that type of innovation and look for ways to apply to solve the problem. So I think you're walking into the military at a great time. I think all of you out there walking into the potential workforce out there are walking in at a great time, because if you're any type of an advocate for clean energy, alternative energy, renewable energy, we're on the cusp of some big things happening there. And we can either lead that effort and write the history books, or we can stand back and let someone else write the history books about what we could have or should have done.
And I'll add one last piece to this. There's a lot of deniers out there, and I think at the junior officer level, you get some and say, hey, we don't care about this. Come on, get a life. The big picture that we've talked about here today, that it's a lot bigger than many would understand. Like, why are you in Syria or Iraq? Or what contributed to the Arab Spring? And tell those that are working for you, hey, there's a lot more to this than you would probably realize that climate change is causing. And as a consequence, we're here fighting. So I think that's another perspective that you would have that others wouldn't.
Like right there in the red.
Okay. My name is Jessica, and I was wondering what some of the initiatives your think tank is taking to fight for sustainability and against climate change locally. I understand that you go to Capitol Hill and you advocate there. What do you do in like local small towns to advocate? Like, what do you advocate for there?
Well, yeah, we were just here meeting with the mayor's office earlier today. I think she was very, very nice to meet with us, but I think she was telling us the good important work that they were doing here, and all of the when we go around, it is very different. There's different problems and situations, environmental ecosystems all around the country and all around the world. And the first step is planning. It's thinking about it. It's just being aware of it. It's to look at it and say, hey, look, what's going to happen? What's going on? And to kind of, think in the reality-based world. And I think sometimes that reality-based world doesn't exist on Capitol Hill in Washington, but it does in a lot of local cities, states, people who have to respond directly to their constituents. In many ways, it doesn't matter why the street is flooding. It's just that it is flooding, and you have to do something about it. So you have to plan for it before it starts to flood. I think we are, as an institution, we are working to get that message out there, to get people to talk about that and start thinking about that. And then to communicate that up to DC, to the national government, that a lot of local and state governments are thinking through.
May I follow up with one more question?
Sure.
Okay, is there any talk about maintaining sustainability part of core education for K through 12?
General Seip, you're a part of mission readiness that does a lot of work on.
Yeah, I haven't heard. I think because let's face it, sustainability, resiliency is kind of a fledgling, young type of movement, so to speak, for lack of a better term there. But I think it's got momentum. Just as Andy was saying, I usually walk away from the Hill somewhat depressed, and I just pull the covers over my head for a couple of days. But when I go out to the states and to the regions, to the local level there, I always walk away, particularly when I come out to colleges, I always walk away impressed and certainly much more positive as far as that there's folks that are going to get after these problems here. So I haven't seen it widespread in the schools there, but we were just at the college of, I was at the college of Colorado College. They've got a school of sustainability, so it's starting to pick up. And I think obviously, all politics are local, all education is local. So it's going to be, the administrators, the teachers, the parents that are going to kind of drive how fast we move toward discussions of sustainability, resiliency in the classroom, and whether we get there or not there. But the fact that we're having these type of conversations is heartwarming to an old man like me.
Yeah, sir, in the back.
Thank you all for being here very much. It's a timely and incredibly important issue, sustainability and dealing with climate change. But I have a question about the extent to which you believe cooperation between the U.S. and China is important. Technological and strategic cooperation is important for addressing issues of climate change because they're the world's two biggest emitters of carbon.
You want to start? Yeah, no. I think it's incredibly important. It doesn't happen. We don't solve this without it. In fact, the United States doesn't solve this. It's important that cities are doing work on this, but the United States doesn't solve this without the national government solving it. And the national government doesn't solve it without working with China, yes, China, but not just that, but also the Europeans, India, Brazil, Indonesia, and a few others. But of those 5, that's about 70% of global emissions. And so if you can get some good work done with them, you can do a lot and go a long way. We've actually got a new paper out on our website about climate diplomacy. And basically what we're saying is, hey, an emission of carbon dioxide, whether it's from South Carolina, Colorado, China, or India, doesn't matter whether it's a ton from any of those places. It goes up into the atmosphere. So climate diplomacy is actually about getting other countries to act in their own interest and helping us to solve it. It actually makes our job easier here as well. So go on our website, americansecurityproject.org, download that, let me know what you think. Anything else?
I was last in Beijing about 10 years ago, and if I remember right, it was in March, and you could hardly breathe. I mean, it was in fact, they told you not to go outside, period. And it hadn't gotten any better. They know they have a huge problem, but they have a huge energy problem on the same hand here, and I think they're building a coal-fired power plant every 2 weeks.
Yeah,
every 2 weeks they're putting a new coal-fired power plant online, but that also said they're the #1 producer of solar farms and wind farms. So they're trying desperately to balance out their fossil fuel burning with alternative sources, but they still want to keep the country going. It can't be done without China or India or the others all getting on board. In Paris is going to be, what happens in Paris in December is going to be big. I mean, it really has to be big. I just hope that it doesn't get sidelined like Kyoto did. I mean, this could be a crowning achievement for the administration. I just hope it doesn't get slammed into the deck by what goes on in Capitol Hill.
Hey, I'm right back there. Yeah.
I just have a quick question about infrastructure in military bases, both in the States and abroad. I've been to both the Charleston Air Force Base here, as well as a couple of Air Force bases in Germany, and have been a little bit surprised at the lack of infrastructure, even just in zero waste initiatives. Is there any kind of policy or recommendations for these bases that are either here in the States or abroad, even as simple as diversion rates or renewable energy or local food purchasing, anything like that, that we kind of see either at a city level or as an institution of higher learning as we see here?
The short answer is yes to all the above. It may not be visible to you all the time, but each of the services has been charged by DoD writ large to get after sustainability, to get after this net zero, to find alternative ways to, if no other reason, to get off the grid at times, so that when that fragile grid goes down, those 24/7 operations that are critical to all the services at their home bases or employee locations can continue on now. So aggressive movement there, not all of it visible to you there, but I will tell you the engineer, the civil engineer, and his equivalent in each one of the services has the ear of the base commander, the garrison commander, the wing commander, on what they're doing. And DoD holds the services accountable about making these goals and have to report back. So there's a report card out there. And in fact, those wing commanders and garrison commanders kind of get their grade as far as overall how they did based on the things they're doing in the way of renewable energy, sustainable energy, better use of the environment, better use of the things that they have control of. I hope that kind of touches your question there.
Along the lines, I mean, I know you're looking into emerging threats, right, for climate change, but how do you go about sort of ranking them in importance? I mean, how do you identify, where's your process for identification and trying to say, okay, what's higher and lower priority when you do that?
It's a good question because I've been working, writing, researching in this space since 2007 when I was working on Capitol Hill, and really got involved starting 2009, 2010. And a couple of things, to be perfectly frank, for example, I remember in 2009, everybody was all saying, oh, you know, Pakistan is really vulnerable and threatened, and we expect a drought at any time could wipe out their wheat crop and, you know, cause all sorts of havoc and uncertainty and everything like that. And then what happened wasn't a drought, but a massive flood. You know, the exact opposite of what we thought. Did wipe out their wheat crop, but then it turned out their society is fairly resilient. There was some unrest in the streets, but, you know, not a huge security challenge. They have plenty of other security challenges. But then we see this unrest starting in Tunisia and reaching throughout the Middle East. And frankly, you know, if you talk to anybody in 2010, 11, Syria was always ranked as the most stable of any of the states. So people thought, oh, you know, Tunisia, Libya, okay, well, maybe something will happen, but nothing's going to happen in Syria. So there's a science to this, but there's also an art to this, and there's a humility factor that predictions about the future are very, very difficult.
Yeah, that said, some aren't.
Yeah.
The Bangladesh one,
yeah,
it's coming. I mean, they know that's coming. We had the foreign minister from the Marshall Islands speaking at our place a couple of weeks ago. His country is in dire straits. I mean, they are going under. So it's those types of things that are those are predictable for sure. I think it's drawing the string on, let's say, Lake Chad does entirely dry up, and then that whole population's got to shift around. There you get a smart kid in the J5 of Africa Command who's tasked with doing all the planning, strategic planning, saying, let me give you a scenario here. Lake Chad dries up, Boko Haram takes over, Nigeria flips, then where does that spread? And is somebody thinking about this? They are, but I'm not so sure that's as widespread in other departments of our national government, but I think they are thinking about it.
Yeah. Sir, right here.
Thank you. And thank you again for all this amazing information. Following up on my question and this gentleman's question, studies about the social cost of carbon, how much it's going to cost mankind is per megaton of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, are very speculative and all over the place. But in my talking to congressional staffers and lobbying, nobody wants to talk about climate change. They just want to talk about economic winners and losers. And it's the current winners who think they're going to be losers that are keeping these guys funded. Has the DoD or your organization created any kind of an economic model that says, okay, this level of carbon dioxide is going to cost us this many billions of dollars in the future on defense versus this level. Something that we can use to meet these winners and losers kind of discussion on the road.
So ASP, again, go to our website, AmericanSecurityProject.org, and look up a report called Pay Now, Pay Later. It's from 2011 that came out, and it was to look at the cost of climate change to each of the 50 states. South Carolina's on there, all of the states are on there, and we tried to detail what projected costs were of climate change out to 2050, and then what the costs of mitigating, costs of taking action on there. And overwhelmingly, not entirely in every state, but almost every state, I think a couple of fossil fuel producing states, Montana, I think, that the cost was harmful. But other than that, it was overwhelmingly, the cost is less to do something about it. The problem, and now this, I'm going to put my degrees in economics, so the cost is concentrated and the benefits are diffuse. So that's a very difficult political system to deal with. It doesn't mean that it's easy to do, economically, but politically it's more difficult. So,
you talk about the economic incentives, and this is a line that I've been touting and I don't hear very often. But you may remember, I think it's 2 years ago, the corporate adjusted fuel economy standards were passed by Congress, or not passed by Congress, the administration imposed them, which demanded that all cars and light trucks go to 54.5 miles per gallon by 2025. And there were a lot of people going, well, this will never happen, or what's interesting about this is every major auto manufacturer supported that policy. And you know why they supported it? They could sell cars. You're going to buy them. You're going to buy a car that gets 54 or 55 miles to the gallon instead of the club clunker you got that's getting 30 today. So they knew there was the money incentive for them, the automakers, to say, I get to sell more cars because of this, and the cars are extremely more efficient. And you can kind of see this working its way through with Tesla and some of the electrical things, and I could talk about that for a while, but there are monetary incentives there for business. John Kerry is one who's always said there's a lot of money to be made in this green world here if the right business guy gets a hold of it and starts selling it in the proper way, and there is. And that's the hard part about it, and I'll be real prejudiced here. It's the fossil fuel industry that just overwhelms and hammers away. And I mean, like the renewable fuel standard, and I'll bet every night for the last 3 weeks at 6:30 in the evening when I turn on the news, there's an ad in DC about kill the renewable fuel standard. This is the worst thing we've ever had, all put on, of course, by the national oil lobby. It's that kind of stuff that just drives me out of my mind.
I think with that, we're going to make that our last question, and thank you all for coming and for your time and your interest, and thanks to the College of Charleston.